This is new Patreon series number 34. We are going to talk about what in the New Testament is translated as the mysteries of the kingdom, the mysteries of the MALKUTH. YESHUA'S word for mysteries was not the same word as in Greek, which refers to the mysteries of the mystery religions and mystery cults. It was the word ratzim, so it really means the secrets, or the heavenly secrets of the MALKUTH. And we find that a lot of these inner circle teachings are preserved in the Gospel of Thomas and in other early texts. So we're going to look at some of the teachings of Yeshua about spiritual regeneration, the Kabbalistic soul, and teachings on death and afterlife. Here's a Facebook meme I really like. It says, "The problem with Christianity is it doesn't produce Christs." Well, guess what? That's what it was originally supposed to do. It didn't become that. It became something entirely different, the worship of Jesus and the hope for salvation and all that sort of thing. But we're going to take a look at inner circle teachings of Yeshua that show and demonstrate clearly what the goal of his halakha and his teachings was for his disciples and ought to be for us. We're going to look at Yeshua's initiatic Kabbalistic revelations, his davrim, about the future of humanity and of Christhood, what it was, and the soul. These are mostly taken from sources other than the New Testament, although there are several teachings of Yeshua in the New Testament that could have been included in this group that I'm looking at. First, I want to review some of the things you've already seen and go more into detail about them. You remember that Papias, who is an excellent source, except most of his stuff has been lost, Papias quoted in Irenaeus, and that's how we get what he said, from the 5 lost books of Papias' exposition of the sayings of the Lord about the Olam Haba, the Messianic age, the MALKUTH of God, or heaven on earth. And we find that his expectation was like that of many of the other rabbis of his time, was not for an immediate judgment and an end of the world, but for long-term progressive process in which the earth and humanity were sanctified, leading to a future that's beyond the dreams of many people. Papias is thought by many scholars today to be an incredibly important source, right along with Matthew, Mark, and Luke, for the logoi, or the teachings of Yeshua. In this little diagram, we show the logoi going into Mark. Mark is the early gospel. The earliest gospel probably came through the sources that were connected with Peter. And then Mark and the logoi, or the sayings of Yeshua, the Jesus tradition, went into the creation of the Gospel of Matthew a generation and a half later. And then probably Matthew drew from Mark and the logoi, and these 3 sources were those that Papias drew upon. He probably knew Matthew's Gospel and Mark's Gospel, but his sources were mainly oral, people who had known the apostles and came by and gave him the teachings, as you might recall. And then Luke's Gospel seems to have been dependent upon all of these, plus Papias himself. Others would argue that Luke was not dependent upon Papias, but there's a lot of good evidence that he was. In any case, Yeshua said that the spiritual self-transformation of individuals will eventually usher in the Messianic age on earth. That's how it comes. The Lord Yeshua used to teach about those future times and say the days will come when vines will grow, each having 10,000 shoots, and each shoot 10,000 twigs, etc., etc. You've seen this before, and you can read it in case you haven't seen earlier presentations. And the animals feeding on these fruits produced by the soil will in turn become peaceful and harmonious towards one another and fully subject to humankind, etc. This is pretty much the teaching that we find from other rabbinic sources at that time. Papias says it was a teaching of Yeshua about the future of humanity in the world. Very different than the kind of way Yeshua's teaching is understood as being eschatological, expecting the immediate end of the world and the judgment of God. Another one that we looked at before was the story of the 5 trees in paradise that we find from Gospel of Thomas Logion 19, which we find parallel to the very same idea in the contemporary of Yeshua, who was Philo of Alexandria, because there was no story that any of us would be familiar with about 5 trees. It's only two trees in paradise, the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and evil and so on, and the tree of eternal life, rather. But these 5 trees also appeared in later Mandean sacred books, and the Mandeans, many of them by legend, trace their themselves back to the disciples of John the Baptist. In that, there are 5 stages of spiritual self-transformation that are outlined, that I've shown in an earlier presentation. For there are 5 trees in the Pardes, the Kabbalistic paradise, which are unmoved in summer or winter, and their leaves never fall, and whoever has knowledge or gnosis or manda of them will not taste death. We've gone through that before. So we can see that that in this case, Yeshua is talking about a stage development. It's kind of a lam-rim. It's kind of a gradual, stage-by-stage development of spirituality in people over a long period of time. We're going to look at Logion 18 of the Aramaic core, the authentic sayings of Yeshua from the Gospel of Thomas. The ultimate spiritual goal of the individual is to achieve primordial Christhood, that is, to become a member of the body of BAR-ENASH, or Messiah. The disciples besought Yeshua, tell us about Ha-Akaret, the final spiritual goal of all worlds. And Yeshua replied, then have you discovered Ha-Roshit, the beginning or head or genesis of divine emanation, that you are now qualified to inquire about Ha-Akaret, the end? This is all Kabbalistic language. It's a Kabbalistic discussion. It is not anything that we find any versions of in the later Gnostics, and it's definitely Jewish Kabbalistic. For where the Maqom, that is the divine eon or olam or place of Ha-Roshit exists, the beginning, that will be Ha-Akaret, the end. Blessed is he who is able to stand at Ha-Roshit, for he shall know Ha-Akaret, and he shall never taste death. Now, these Aramaic Kabbalistic terms and idioms indicate the authenticity of this, Ha-Roshit and Ha-Akaret, and the idea of to stand and to taste death and so on. Questions like, have you discovered Ha-Roshit, are idiomatic ways of throwing the burden of thought over to the student in Kabbalistic discussion. And the disciples, then, are asking about their own future existence in the final perfection of all things when time and duality cease to exist. And Yeshua tells them they are on a path of return to the perfection of the primordial, pre-existent Adam Kadmon, or what Paul called the second Adam, or what we would call Christhood, the eternal man that is the first manifestation of Godhead in reality. In the thought that we find in Sefer Yetzirah, which is representative of the Kabbalistic thought in Yeshua's time, there are 4 worlds: the world of Atziluth, the world of the beginning of Godhead and of the part where no human being would ever really be part of, and no saint would be part of. It's the invisible triune beginning of all things, the world of Bria, the world of Yetzirah, and these are all emanated or manifested through the Sephirot that are not connected with each other. They have no way of communicating. They are all just, each of them are just vessels that hold, contain the virtues of Godhead. And when time begins, when Godhead allegorically smashes the husks or the vessels that contain these virtues, so that they can communicate with each other through the paths. And when that occurs, we get the fourth world, the world of Asiya. And so we can see now that this central column has, allegorically, has dropped. It has descended. And so now the world of Malkuth is now below the original state that it was in. The Klipot have been released into a world. The universe is a dualistic universe, therefore it has action and reaction, good and evil, and so on. And in that situation is the situation we find today. And this is the drawing you will see of the Kabbalistic tree in the Zohar and many other places, talking about the human condition. Well, Yeshua was talking about a path of the fall of humanity, so to speak, which comes from Keter, from Godhead. And if you follow this lightning flash, as it's called, all the way down to Malkuth, that's the condition we're in now. The condition that Yeshua's halakha brought upon people was an ascent, an anadas, an upward ascent back to the source, back to the eternal one, to the beginning from the end. And that ascent comes up symbolically through this central column, and that returns the divine state, having been educated and illuminated and made worthy to be divine, and so on, to its original form. So this is the Roshit and Ha'akaret, and this is one way of looking at Yeshua's concept of these things. It's the idea of a path of return. I'm looking at it Kabbalistically, using some terminology that is characteristic of later Kabbalah, but much of this is found in the Sefer Yetzirah, and which is a 2nd century document that represents centuries of earlier esoteric teaching. So, where the Maqom of the beginning exists, that will be the ultimate end. Personal Christhood is return to the eternal divine human archetypal body of Adam Kadmon through self-liberation and sanctification. It happens in stages. The disciples besought Yeshua, tell us about Ha'akaret, and he replied, then have you discovered Ha-Roshit, etc. Blessed is he who is able to stand at Ha-Roshit, for he shall know Ha'akaret, and he shall never taste death. Yeshua's Kabbalistic Ratzim derived from much earlier Hellenistic Jewish syncretism that was later reflected in Jewish Christian Gnostic apocalyptic, such as 2nd Esdras, written about AD 75-90, contemporary with the Gospels of Matthew and Luke and so on, and the Apocalypse of Baruch. I've given you a reference here, this good reference in Wikipedia. F.F. Bruce, a biblical scholar, wrote this saying about Ha'akaret and Ha-Roshit is reminiscent of 2nd Esdras 7:30. The world shall be as it was at the first beginnings. This concept was a Jewish idea of the destiny of the world and humanity. Marvin Meyer comments in his translation and commentary on the Manichaean Psalm book. He quotes, "Holy ones, rejoice with me, for I have returned again to my beginning. I have received my clean garments, my robes that do not become old." And we can confer the Acts of Thomas hymn of the pearl that we'll look at later. So these ideas are Jewish ideas. They're ideas that we're not surprised that Yeshua was using as part of his discourse, and they represent the idea of return to a high state through stages that would eventually result in the achieving of what we would in Christianity call Christhood. The Jewish emanation of the primordial Sephirotic tree that we know through Jewish traditions reflected the Alexandrian philosophical Ouroboros, the tail-biter, where the end leads back to the beginning. This became an important symbol in Gnostic and other forms of sectarian Christianity that were more attuned to the esoteric teachings of Yeshua. In fact, we find it very often represented in an infinity symbol. Plato's Timaeus describes the Ouroboros as the first living thing created, which became the universe, quote, his own waste providing his own food, and all that he did or suffered taking place in and by himself. For the demiurge, the creator, conceived that a being which was self-sufficient would be far more excellent than one which lacked anything. So the universe is an Ouroboros whose beginning equals the ending. And these ideas had permeated Jewish thought as well through their Hellenistic contacts, and that existed well before the time of Yeshua. Here's a Gnostic gem from the Roman era of Egypt of 1st century A.D., showing the Ouroboros on the gem. It's a symbol of the beginning meeting the end. Here's an early alchemical Ouroboros illustration with the words en to pan. One is the all. It's from the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, the 3rd century Alexandrian alchemist. It was a great mystic concept. One is all, and through it is all, and by it is all, and if you have not all, all is nothing. So these are mystical ideas that were floating around in Judaism and later in Gnosticism, and had already existed in Hellenistic philosophical thought. Yeshua applies the idea to the advance and the ultimate goal of Christhood for his disciples. By this time, if you've been watching my presentations, you know that Yeshua did not teach in a vacuum. He didn't just invent everything he did. He was part of a culture. He was part of a zeitgeist. And so was Judaism. It was not some pure, separated thing that had no influences from anywhere else. From the get-go, what we call Judaism was syncretistic. And all these influences started to be found there. Logion 37 talks about experiencing the vision of the eternal BAR-ENASH. As you know by now, the BAR-ENASH, badly translated as Son of Man, means the offspring of humanity, or the second Adam, as Paul called it, was what became in Christianity, Greek Christianity, the Christos, the Christ. His disciples asked, "When will the BAR-ENASH be revealed to us, and when shall we have a divine vision of him?" Jesus answered, "When you disrobe without being ashamed, and take up your garments and place them under your feet and tread on them, like little children, then you will see the Son of the Living One, the Abba, and you will not be afraid. So the question is, when or under what conditions will they be able to experience a vision of the Christ or Messiah and the MALKUTH that manifests on earth? And Yeshua says when they're able to live without fear of death, the disrobing is always represents leaving the physical body behind, without being ashamed, which is an allegorical way of saying without being fearful of guilt that would have to be purified in Gehenna. He advised his disciples to purify themselves in life so that they would not have to go through the purification of Gehenna. And to disrobe probably also means to enter into the Merkaba trance of death, which we'll talk about later, leaving the body behind. And when they learn non-attachment to the illusions of the physical body and worldly possessions, that is, take up your garments and place them under your feet like little children and tread on them, like the initiated Yeladim, the little children who will inherit the MALKUTH. Remember, the Yeshua's word for his initiated disciples was Yeladim. An initiated disciple was a Yelad, which meant a little child, even less than 7 days old. But that was actually a term for a disciple. Then they will be able to experience a vision of the BAR-ENASH, or the Christ, with the eye of the soul rather than the eyes of flesh. And this, by the way, and they will be able to do this without being afraid. And in this case, we're talking about human fear as opposed to divine awe or the fear of God, which in the wisdom schools is the beginning of wisdom. So we can compare Logion 113b. The MALKUTH of the Abba is spread out upon the earth, but men do not see it. Logion 80, whoever has known the world has found only the body, but whoever has known the world to be only an external body, of that person the world is not worthy. Now we want to talk a little bit about the idea of having a vision, or Kabbalistic vision, and non-attachment and the trance of death. The motifs of clothing and garments and disrobing are used in other davarim as Kabbalistic metaphors for leaving behind the basar, the flesh, and the nephesh, or outer self or personality. To disrobe was to die consciously, a practice that was taught in Rosicrucian and other medieval mystic traditions, and is still taught today in Tibetan Buddhism and other meditation traditions. Physical death occurred in two stages. The first was physical death, in which ruach, or spirit, withdrew from flesh, and the human body, the human basar, the flesh, died and returned to its origins. The second occurred about 6 weeks later, when ruach withdrew from the nephesh, or invisible personality that survived death. Yeshua's resurrection appearances for 40 days after his execution were probably interpreted Kabbalistically as visions of his invisible nephesh body that could appear and transmit speech and disappear and walk through walls, according to the later gospel accounts. So what we're talking about here is a Jewish concept of the subtle bodies of a human being that were part and parcel of the thought word of Yeshua, the thought world of Yeshua, and we're going to look more closely at that later. Now, with normal human beings, the roughly 40-day period after death is when those close to the deceased might hear their voices and catch glimpses of them out of the corner of their eyes, and mediums have their best luck in contacting the dead. So Yeshua's resurrection appearances for 40 days is coincidentally the same period of time that it was thought that the nephesh, or the subtle body, the subtle personal body, the astral body, or sidereal body, as some people would call it, survived after the death of the physical body, after which it went through what was called the second death, and then one went into Gehenna, or if one were a great saint, one just simply bypassed Gehenna. The astral shell, or nephesh, of the deceased seems to dissolve after this 40-day period, and the pall lifts after a normal mourning period, except in certain cases it can produce ghost and even possession phenomena. As a saint of the Kima, however, Yeshua was able to move and operate consciously in his nephesh body, when he could apparently manipulate this at will until the time came for his fully conscious second death, or ascension, as it was called in the Greek Gospels. Now, divine vision and Merkaba ascent was always done in the trance of death, which imitated the stages of death as opposed to drowsiness and sleep. This Devar, the revelation of Logion 37, seems to imply that when the disciples are able to imitate the stages of death in practices of mishkad, of divine forms of meditation, to achieve divine vision, they will be able to face physical death consciously and without fear, without being ashamed, was the way it was put. Now, this concept of the trance of death we first hear about in the Testament of Reuben, a couple of centuries earlier. There are two forms of divine image in the human being. The eighth, above the crown of the head, has a twofold character, like all of them. They have the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer HaRa. The true divine image is the trance of death, which is the ability to go into trance and receive divine vision, to receive prophetic oracles, etc. And that is paired with its evil twin, which is the illusion of dreams and nightmares and sleep and so on, which is not the same thing. So this is what we're talking about for achieving vision. Now, when they get to this state where they are able to imitate the stages of death in practices of Mishkan, which was done by the Neoplatonists and other people who practiced leaving their bodies behind in order to ascend, for the soul to ascend to the divine state and so on, was a practice known in many. It's not the same as just an out-of-body astral projection. It was rather a form of contemplation. In this form, and in this high consciousness, they were able to experience divine guidance and divine contact. And once they have developed that ability to make that kind of contact, then the disciples will no longer be attached to wealth and possessions. They will tread on your garments and place them under your feet. They will be able to behold the damut, or visionary likeness, of the Son of the Living One face to face, and they will be able to stand in the presence of that and not be afraid in the sense of worldly fear. The damuth is interesting because there are two terms that are used in Genesis that were very carefully analyzed and used in specific ways by the Kabbalists, that when the Yahweh Elohim created Adam, humanity, in his damuth and zelam, the damuth is the likeness one would see. It's not the same as an image. It's a non-physical image. A zelam is like a physical image, like a statue or something carved out of wood. It's that sort of thing. But as a damuth is the pattern. It's the blueprint. It's the what we would call the idea of the image, or the idea of the zelam. of the Son of the Living One. You will be able to have that vision. Remember, Yeshua says, blessed are those who are pure of heart, for they shall have a vision. They shall have a vision of Godhead. This is the attitude one develops towards all these things once one achieves this state is not unlike the attitude that more advanced Buddhist practitioners develop and other people do, and that everything else is of no real value compared to the value of what they find in this interior exploration of the higher realities. Paul in Philippians says, I also regard everything to be loss on account of the surpassing knowledge of Christ Jesus my Lord, on account of whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and I consider them to be nothing more than shit, so that I may gain Christ. Paul did say shit, and that was the word skubala. It didn't mean poo-poo, it didn't mean doo-doo, it was just plain shit. And so he considered all other things in comparison to this to be excrement. So this is a way, by way of explaining the deeper meanings of this Logion 37. Logion 59, seek the vision of God while in flesh. Look unto the living one, ha-chaya, while you are alive, lest you die and seek to see him and have not power to do so. And this Devar advises the disciples to practice divine Merkaba communion with the Godhead while yet in flesh, so that after death they will be able to maintain that communion, which is visionary, to see the Damuth. It's in the mind, it's mental. That's what there is after death. There's no physical things. Now, while Chaya can simply refer to a living person, when it is given the article ha-chaya, it appears through the Coptic, as it appears in this saying, it is a name of God that's found in Old Testament usage, the living one. It can also refer to other living creatures, the chayot, around the Merkaba throne of God, but here it means Godhead with the sense, seek God while you are alive. That is, how do you seek God? You seek to be pure so that you can have a visionary contact with Godhead. The Coptic phrase means to gaze upon with the eyes, and the corollary denotes seeing in divine vision. So it says, seek the vision of God while in flesh, look unto the living one while you are alive, lest you die and seek to see him and have not power to do so. In Aramaic, the distinction between the two kinds of seeing might be that while in flesh the disciples should use the Merkaba techniques of shachad or meditation to gaze upon the chaya, so that after death they will be able to see their way in ascent through the Shemayim, through the heavens. The Gnostic understanding of this Logion was that Jesus was exhorting his disciples to honor him as the Messiah while he was present with them, because after death it would be too late. And similarities to that interpretation can be found in John's Gospel, but that is not what the actual authentic Logion says. None of these is an authentic way of understanding it. Yeshua did not demand messianic honors during his ministry. Logion 11 is a collection of several Kabbalistic inner circle ratzim that relate to these ideas. Scholars originally put them together as one Logion, but there are several different logia that have been collected in this because they probably relate to one sort of topic. They go like this. This heaven and the one above it shall pass away. Now we know we talked about that before in an earlier thing. There are 10 heavens. This heaven and the one above it are the first and second heavens, the day heaven and the night heaven. These heavens are the physical world that we know, and Yeshua says that will pass away. Not just at death does it pass away, but eventually in the future. The spiritually dead are not alive, and the spiritually alive shall not die. Now, in the eternal olam of the Abba, which is, I'm indicating with the purple brackets here, these are the higher heavens, the third through the 10th heaven. In the eternal olam of God, those who are spiritually alive never die. They don't die. There is no death at that point. In the days when you ate dead things, you made them alive. But when you enter into the eternal light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you became two. But now that you are two, what will you do? Now, spiritual life is, which is translated badly in English as eternal life, is the life of the Olam Ha'aba, the world of God, the invisible world of God, the eternal heavenly eternities of Godhead that are invisible to human beings. The eating metaphor is used in different ways. In the days when you ate dead things, you made them alive. That's your regular food. You kill animals and plants and you eat them. But when you enter into the eternal light, what will you do? Do you have to eat then? Today you eat physical food. What will you do for food? Well, it will not be necessary. There is no necessity to eat because you don't have a physical body that you have to maintain with other physical bodies. The original humanity, the humanity that was the pattern for the entire universe, all the worlds, which is called Adam Kadmon, was also the blueprint for the first Adam on Earth, who is divided into male and female. But the eternal Adam, the eternal humanity, is comprehensive, includes all sexes or both sexes, and that is the day when you were one, when you were Adam Kadmon, and when you were the original Adam before it was divided into Adam and Eve. On the day when you were one was when you were the original Adam Kadmon. Now that you are two refers to the Adam, the first Adam that was eventually expelled himself from the Garden of Paradise, who is divided into two, Adam and Eve. Now, the rabbinic discourse often ends with a rhetorical question. What will you do? What will you do? It expects a paradoxical answer. You must become one. So the idea is that now that you are two, what are you supposed to do? You must become one. You must return. Become Tam, Shalem, whole. You must return to the primordial Christhood that is at your basic root. Now let's examine the inner circle teachings about becoming Tam and Shalem and whole. Logion 48, where Yeshua says that the neshama must guide the nephesh, the personality. We're going to look at these divisions or these aspects or of the human constitution a little bit further ahead, but for our own terms we can just simply say the soul must guide the personality, not the other way around. He says if two were to make peace with each other, the two are the neshama and the nephesh. If the two were to make peace with each other, to make peace, the soul and nephesh must coexist harmoniously with a personality guided by intimate communication with the soul and its higher aspects. If two were to make peace with each other, in this one house is your physical, mental, human incarnation, they will say to the mountain, move away from here, and it will move away. Well, commanding a mountain to move was a Jewish and also a Greek expression for exercising divine power. Yeshua is saying, if you make peace, if you allow your soul to guide your life, your personality, and you make them coexist harmoniously in this one body, in flesh, in this world, then you will be able to exercise divine power and responsibility. Faithfulness, emunah, was what this was about. To achieve interior shalem or tam, or perfection or unification of the human and divine, develops the divine power, or what was known as the MALKUTH, the sovereignty of the perfected messianic saint who is apprenticing the ways of the Abba. In Rabbinic Haggadah, the metaphor of uprooting a mountain was used idiomatically to emphasize the result of a determined perseverance. It was misrepresented and misinterpreted in Gentile Greek Christianity and the New Testament Gospels as belief. But Yeshua's word was not belief. It was emunah, faithfulness, fidelity, persistence. I told you before that Rabbi Eliezer, who was a contemporary of Yeshua, also from Nazareth, also in Galilee, also decried the excessive laws and rules that the Judean and Jerusalem Pharisees put upon their disciples to cause them to do things like strain their soup so they wouldn't accidentally swallow a fly and all that sort of thing, which they called, these are not the laws of God, these are the laws of men. And Eliezer said the same thing as Yeshua. Eliezer, when he said that these laws, when he was teaching and said that these laws of the Jerusalem Pharisees were not God's laws, and they don't have to be followed as God's laws. God's laws are justice and compassion. As Yeshua would have taught, being from the same place and location, several of his disciples disputed with him, and so he said, if the halakha, if the real way of God, agrees with me, let this carob tree prove it. And then the tree was uprooted and moved 100 cubits away, and we find that described in some rabbinic literature of the period. The uprooting was seen as proof of fidelity, of emunah, to God's teachings, not a result of commanding the tree to move by the strength of one's belief. And this idea that if you just believe enough, you can make things happen is ridiculous. It was never anything. It's the basis for these ideas like faith healing and all kinds of things, but that was not something that Yeshua taught, and it is not what say to the mountain, move away from here, and move away meant. That is not at all what it meant in Yeshua's discourse. If two, that is, who are divided, they are se'ef, that was Yeshua's term for divided, or dipsychoi, dipsychoi, double-souled, a number of other words. If two were to make peace, that is, become spiritually united with each other in this one house, in this body of this flesh and this life, that one would be able to do the works of saints and prophets, like the mastery of the BAR-ENASH or the Hakim, while yet in flesh, was the teaching of this. So Yeshua taught that people should become Christ-like in flesh, and they will therefore receive sovereignties. So let's take a look at Logion 22b, which talks about the making a self-transformation from being divided, se'ef, to be becoming tam, complete or perfect, or shalem, or whole. They ask him, therefore, shall we, being newly born, enter into the Malkuth? Now, the newly born is the Yeledim, the infants, newly born infants, enter into the Malkuth. That's the term for the initiated disciple. A newly reborn Yeledim, the normal state of humanity is fallen, meaning having separated its consciousness from the internal heavens and forgotten who and what it is. Yeshua's term for this was se'ef, divided. When the division begins to heal or be unified through practice of initiatic halakha, then one is on the path to becoming tam, shalem, or whole or perfect, like all heavenly beings. So they ask him, shall we then, being newly born, enter into the Malkuth? Will we receive divine powers and sovereignties? Yeshua answered them, when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer as the inner, let's take a look at that. Inner as the outer. Yeshua taught his disciples to make their hearts single, not to be se'ef, that is double-minded or double-souled, but to speak and act without guile, and to let your yes mean yes and your no mean no. In other words, be the same person on the outside that you are on the inside, and make this interior person a person of integrity, truth, and virtue. So when you make the inner as the outer and the outer as the inner, and this is a halakha for unification and integration. It's the inner circle teaching on the process of, or remedy for being double-souled, which is the normal state of humanity. This refers to the ongoing conflict of good and evil impulses, the Yetzer HaTov and the Yetzer HaRa, in the heart of each individual, the good and evil Yetzerim. We've discussed that before. And when you make the above as the below, the above as the below, the Johannine genesis or spiritual begetting that is from ano, the above, that's in Greek, it says to be begotten from ano, the above, is based on the Hebrew Aramaic yeled, to beget. The Coptic word for the above is pe, sky or heaven, in this particular saying. This means to clothe the human personality of flesh with the perfect humanity, or BAR-ENASH, to make the above as the below, to bring Christhood and divinity into your flesh. The process for this transformation is known as the New Testament Greek hagiosmos, which is for Aramaic mikdash, from the root kadosh, holiness or heaviness, and it means sanctification, consecration. Yeshua's halakha is centered on sanctification. The unification of heaven and earth was understood as a divine messianic wedding or marriage, a hieros gamos, a conjunctio. The sacrament of the bridal chamber of the Gospel of Philip derived from the messianic Haggadah about the marriage feast of BAR-ENASH, the marriage of the Lamb in Christian Apocalyptic, or Yeshua's parables about Christ as the bridegroom. And we're going to learn more about that later, because with respect to the male groom, which is all other aspects of humanity are feminine of the human constitution. We'll look at that in Hebrew in a while. And this was symbolized in Yeshua's messianic Seder or Shabbat breaking of bread with his disciples. They shared the bread of the morrow that was a foretaste of the life of the divine Olam of the Abba. So continuing with this, and when you make the male and the female into a single unity, so that the male will not be merely masculine and the female merely feminine, well, the unification of masculine and feminine, the division of Adam into male and female was the beginning of human division within its own soul. All beings of the Shemayim, or the heavenly Olam Ha'aba, are spiritually androgynous, including the angels and those who have no need of reincarnation and exist in the Shema. When they make that achievement, they have reunified themselves. The perfected neshama, or soul, has no attachment to biological gender. Yeshua has one statement about one who has made himself a eunuch for the Malkuth. It's translated as kingdom of God, the sovereignty of God. But this idea of transformation from Se'ef to Tom, from divided to unified again, is represented by making this primordial split between the masculine and the feminine, to reunifying that and bringing one together psychologically, to make them psychologically androgynous. They have all the aspects of both the masculine and the feminine. And when you make human eyes to serve as God's eye, well, this is the idea of incarnating the image of the new Adam, the new humanity, which is androgynous. It's humanity, all, male, female, whatever. There is no male or female in Christ, as Paul said. That means to look upon all beings, to make human eyes to serve as God's eyes, to look upon all beings with the single eye of compassion and justice. And that's, by the way, wrongly translated by many Coptologists, is when you make a human eye to serve as God's eye, or to make human eyes to serve as God's eyes. It doesn't say that. It says to make human eyes, plural, to serve as God's eye, singular. And a human hand to serve as God's hand. One's hand is allegorical for one's actions, to serve for God's hand or divine purposes. When the things that you do, all the things that you do, serve for these divine purposes, not for egoistic self-aggrandizement. And a human foot to serve as God's foot. One's foot means the walk, or the halakha, or conduct through life, to serve for God's walk. As you walk through life, you are doing the walk that God of the divine way in life. And a human image to serve as the divine image. To purify the human image, the Yetzerim in the heart, so that it becomes a field of activity only for the Yetzer HaTov, the good image, the inclination, the imago Dei, the image of God, thus consecrating and sanctifying all thought, word, and deed to the divine ways of wisdom, compassion, justice, and all other attributes of the Abba, or Godhead. That means to make a human image to serve as a divine image. And here, the human image, where there are probably two different words in Aramaic, I haven't translated in that way, but probably the human Zelim to serve as a divine Damuth, the human physical image to serve as the divine blueprint. Then you shall attain the sovereignty, the divine powers. You shall have apprenticed and become a Christ in flesh on earth. Attaining divine Malkuth was to inherit the rulership and co-mastery with the Abba in stewardship of the earth and all beings. This was the Danielic prophecy. So now let's take a look at some initiatic teachings on death and afterlife. And now we're going to examine the parts of the soul. Let's take a look at the subtle constitution of the human being, the subtle bodies. Now, in the fallen or divided or separated state of humanity, separated from Godhead, separated from paradise, etc., this is represented and can be represented Kabbalistically on the Kabbalistic tree as the fallen tree, and that can represent different aspects of the human, you might call it soul, but it's really the subtle bodies. And in the world of Asiya, You have, of course, basar, your flesh, your physical body, and your nefesh, which is kind of like an etheric body. It can be separated from the body, and it survives the body maybe 40 days after the body dies. But then in the divine world, there is ruach, and then there is the soul, which is neshama. And whereas the neshama is the soul of the nefesh, and the basar is the body of the nefesh, the neshama becomes actually the body of a higher thing called the chaya, the life force, the divine body. And then above that is yachida, a state of unity that is the part that reincarnates and sends down a new impulse for a new incarnation, is one way it might be understood. And these can be divided between the worlds of Asiya, Yetzirah, Bria, and Atzilut, and corresponding to them. Now, so the subtle bodies of humanity were attributed in YESHUA'S era as follows. In the world of Asiya, or the manifest universe, it is Nefesh. And that's a subtle body. You don't see it. You can only see basar, flesh. In the higher world of Yetzirah, where the seeds of the visible universe pre-exist as invisible forms, and the hosts of lower angels abide, it is Ruach, in which it is possible to ascend and descend between human and divine worlds. In the even higher world of Bariah and the commanders of angelic legions, it is Neshama. And in the world of Atziluth, where archangels reside, it is Chaya, the living essence. And at the highest level in the body of Adam Kadmon, the BAR-ENASH, it is Yachida, the monadic or unique essence that is a ray of God. Ruach binds Neshama to the Nefesh. Spirit binds the soul to the personality. And Neshama is bound by nature to both the individual human being and to Godhead. So the soul is bound both to God and to the personality. The highest octaves of the soul, Chaya and Yachida, are not bound in any way to the physical body as the lower psychic aspects are. Now, Adam Kadmon, the eternal BAR-ENASH, the Christ, the supreme God created Adam Kadmon as an anthropomorphic template or blueprint to serve as the beacon and goal of all souls. As seen by the prophet Ezekiel, this anthropomorphic template resembles a human of dazzling white light sitting upon a throne. And that is the vision that one achieves in Merkaba mysticism. As Ezekiel says, and above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness, the damut, the plan or blueprint of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of a throne, the damut of the throne, that's what you would see in a vision. It has no matter to it, and it's an idea. And upon the likeness of a throne was the likeness as the appearance of a human. Adam, the word in Hebrew is Adam. And above, upon it, this was the appearance of the likeness or damut of the glory of Yahweh. So the concept in Merkaba mysticism is that what Ezekiel saw, and that became the basic blueprint for all Merkaba ascent, was a man. And that man had the name Yahweh. Now, it's not the real ultimate Godhead. It is the highest form that a human being can see of God. And that's the vision of God. And after he created the form of heavenly man, it says in the Zohar, which is much later than this period, but will give you an idea about this. After he, God, the supreme God, created the form of the heavenly man, the Christ, he used him as a chariot wherein to descend, and he wishes to be called after his form, which is the sacred name Yahweh. In other words, the name of Christ, the name of the BAR-ENASH, is Yahweh. Adam Kadmon is Yahweh. So, Yeshua's Kabbalistic view of the human soul derived from ancient Egyptian mortuary science that was reflected in post-Babylonian Midrashic synthesis. This is part of the Hellenistic synthesis, although these ideas may go back much farther than we think in Hebrew religion. But they definitely came in through the Hellenic and Hellenistic period. And here's what they are. At the lowest level, we have basar, mortal flesh, the meat, the physical body that decomposes after death. And this becomes what Paul called sarx. That's all we can see. The rest of these are invisible. The nephesh is the mortal personality, the mortal mind, the lower animal nature, the astral sidereal body, what we would call the mind, composed of subtle ethers that survives death for about 40 days and dissolves back into its subtle elements in a second death. It contains the mortal mind and perception and personality and gender individuality of the deceased. So it has sex, it has prejudices, it has a language it speaks, etc. It's connected to the physical body by the silver cord, and other things that are described in Ecclesiastes, Koheleth. Paul uses the term suke, which we can translate as soul. It's probably derived from the Egyptian ka and the kaibit. But it's that Paul's term suke means literally psychic life. It means a very different thing than pneuma, which is spirit. So Paul's term suke really means the life of something. But it's the psychic life. It's that which animates and gives thought and concepts to the body. Ruach, spirit, is released when the nephesh disintegrates at the second death. It's androgynous, and it's a substance of the divine olam. It's the Pauline Greek pneuma, or pneuma, probably derived from the Egyptian ba. As you will recall, that after the death of a ruler of Egypt, his body was kept, and symbolic doors and walls were designed for the ka to travel in, because it could travel like an astral body, sidereal body, and was kept alive by the essences of fruits and vegetables and things that were given as offerings. And then the ba would be able to travel down to the ka and up to the heavens and bring back information. So the ba was like the ruach. It was that which connects the heavens and the earth. The neshama is the soul that is incarnated at birth and survives death for purgatory, or Gehinnom, and paradise. Gehinnom doesn't mean hell, it means purgatory, a place where you're purged. It is the immortal and divine body for Yehida. It can be defiled or sanctified by the nephesh. That's very important. What you do in your life will either defile or sanctify your soul. So you can really mess up your soul by the things you choose to do in life, or you can sanctify it. It's probably derived from the Egyptian aku. Chaya is the spiritual nous, which is a Hermetic Greek term. Paul also uses the term, or the understanding, the higher mind of the neshama that can experience a vision of Godhead. The Pauline term was the mind, or the nous of Christ. It's probably derived from the Egyptian sahu. It's the divine personality of the purified neshama. And it's no longer subject to being defiled in any way. Because in the world of the Olam Ha'aba, the world of the divine Olam, there are all kinds of individuals. and with all kinds of personalities, just like we have here on Earth. They're not all melted together in one glunk or anything like that, and they each have a different kind of chaya, a different kind of mind, higher mind. And Yahida is the highest aspect of the human subtle constitution through which a tzaddik, or righteous person, or a realized saint, achieves divine union with Godhead. Yahida is another Hebrew feminine term. The divine soul of the neshama is the Yahida. But the Yahida cannot be defiled in any way. It is feminine to Godhead, who is masculine, and the masculine aspect of Godhead that is the bridegroom that eventually is joined to and reunited with Yahida is Yahid, the masculine form. It's a hieros gamos, the individual in Godhead, the Kabbalistic idea, the Kabbalistic marriage of Christ and his church, or the idea of the bridegroom, the heavenly bridegroom, and the bride of Christ, is an old Kabbalistic idea of how spiritual perfection is attained, and that's the final uniting of the masculine and the feminine. Because every one of these terms, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yahida, is feminine. And the only masculine term is yahid, which is the final goal of the wedding, or the bridal chamber of Yahida and Yahid. Now, all these higher octaves of the human constitution, as I say, are feminine with respect to the final stage of divine union of Yahida, the bride, with Yahid, the messianic groom. We have this reflected in Gnostic and Valentinian bridal chamber rituals that are derived from this Kabbalistic allegory for divine union. Now, I want to go in more detail about this concept of the Kabbalistic self that was current at the time of Yeshua and had been for some time earlier. You remember that Didymus Judas Thomas is regarded to be the twin of Jesus, Jesus Christ, in Thomasian Christology. In other words, in the Acts of Thomas and things, we have Thomas being the twin brother of Jesus. Well, this twin brother idea is actually a concept that goes back in different forms through Kabbalistic ideas, and we find repeated then in Valentinian ideas. The twin, the higher self, the higher twin, which is later in Neoplatonism called the agoides, the radiant self, ultimately wants to unite with the lower self, the higher self with the lower self. So in Valentinian Christianity, the ultimate goal in the bride chamber was the uniting of the higher self, which was male, which was the lower self of all beings, whether you're male or female. You are female with respect to Godhead. Reuniting of the higher self with the lower self, the bridegroom with the bride. And this is a very old idea, and this is where the ideas in the Gospel of Thomas, the sect that produced it and produced all the other Thomas literature, especially the Acts of Thomas, got their idea of Judas Thomas as the twin of Jesus. So now let's take another way of looking at this Kabbalistic constitution of the self. At the very top is Yahida, which is the guardian angel, and that becomes later a Neoplatonistic agoides, the radiant self. This, by the way, is a painting that was done by one of the hearers of the fellow who established the I Am movement at Mount Shasta. It's a painting I like very much, and it does is something she saw while he was speaking, while he was talking. So here's my personal Kabbalistic constitution. Here's me. I happen to be sitting in a boat on the way to Cabo San Lucas. That's my body. That's my flesh, my basar. That changes. I mean, if you take a look at my flesh, from the time I was a zygote until the time an old man and I die and that body disintegrates, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it changes form and shape, and it goes through a lot of changes, and finally it dies, and poof, it explodes. That's the flesh. That is not permanent. That will go away. The nephesh, the personality, the lower mind, or the sukikas body, the ordinary consciousness, my ordinary consciousness, which is my nephesh, will survive my death by perhaps 40 days, but it too will eventually dissolve back into its own elements, and that is impermanent. That goes away. Now, ruach, or spirit, divine consciousness, the pneumatikos body, the higher mind, the basis of all reality, is the realm beyond my nephesh and my basar, the realm of the olam of God, the olam ha'aba, and I represent that here with an alchemical symbol of a king and queen united in one body, an androgyny, a sun and the moon. And because all beings in spirit are androgynous, that's a way of representing the fact that they are whole, complete, tom. They haven't been divided like Adam was. This whole area, this whole thing, is the world of spirit. It's invisible to us. Now, our soul, our neshama, is that which connects the lower worlds and the higher worlds. And the soul can be elevated and it can be sanctified by the things we do on earth, choosing to follow the good inclination, the Yetzer HaTov, It can be sanctified. It can also be defiled by the actions that we do, the actions where we turn away from compassion and justice and things like that. And it's going to reflect what we've done, and yet it's part of that divine world. It's spiritual. But the neshama, the soul, is actually like a body to the chaya, the higher mind, the divine personality, which exists at this level. And the chaya, the soul of the soul, beyond that is the yahida, which is also the divine spark, the feminine soul of the soul. And that is the highest aspect. All of these are feminine with regard to Godhead, which is represented in this as the divine male. The divine male, and we refer to this as a zealom, not as just as a damut. It's not just a mental idea. The divine male is the separated heart, masculine part, divine part that the yahida would be joined to. Now, if we make a connection, if the soul and the nefesh, the personality, the mind, if the soul is allowed to be the guide of the personality and the personal works, then we have a connection, and we're able to see the higher visions. We're able to have that connection for us to guide us and help us and warn us of danger and things like that. If we don't make the connection, if we break the connection between the nefesh, the mind, the personality, and the neshama, the soul, then we are not guided by higher and spiritual things. We can actually lose our soul. Yeshua said that you can lose your neshama. And this is what it means, to ignore it, to not listen to its promptings, and eventually separate yourself from it. And then you have lost your soul. So that when you die, you are not able to be awake. You have no continuity of consciousness. And a new incarnation will not really have any memory of a previous incarnation, and so on. That's the idea. Now, Gilgal, the cycles, a term in Hebrew for reincarnation, each being, each nefesh, each person must reincarnate until perfection is achieved in physical incarnation. As Yeshua said, no man can work at night. Work while you have the daylight. That means while you're in flesh, that's where you do the work. That's where you do the spiritual work. What you do in life will determine the ways you can change, and you can't change yourself. You can't make spiritual progress once you're dead. You have to do that in life. That's why life in flesh is so important. So, reincarnation, or Gilgal, is instigated from Yahida, which will start a new incarnation, new body, new nefesh, new lower qualities, same soul, same chaya, the same rest of it, but will incarnate into flesh as a new flesh and a new personality. And the final goal is the bride chamber, the union of Yahida and Yahid. We're going to take a look at Logion 112. Woe to the soul that depends upon flesh. Woe to the flesh because it depends upon the soul, but woe to the soul if it depends upon, or the Aramaic is clings to, the flesh. Literally, it says, woe to the flesh that depends upon the soul, and woe to the soul that depends upon the flesh. This is a typical paradoxical statement by Yeshua. Here's what it means. The neshama can either be sanctified or defiled by the nephesh, by your personality. Flesh is emanated from spiritual principles, and therefore it depends upon the soul. But nephesh can ignore and defile the soul, and thus woe to that soul. He can hurt the soul. Nephesh, the personality, clings to a dead person. There's the soul depending upon flesh. In a spiritually undeveloped man, when he dies, his astral body hangs around. That's why people are afraid of ghosts and graveyards and things like that. But the nephesh releases the body easily in a spiritually developed person. Yeshua, for example, died quickly in a spiritually developed person. Now, in Logion 87, Yeshua taught that the second death of the nephesh is inevitable. No matter how much it's resisted, the nephesh will eventually dissolve. It is not immortal. The personality of flesh, that is the nephesh, that clings to flesh, basar, will waste away, and the soul, neshama, that is attached to these two will become desolate. In other words, no longer in union with them. Literally, it says, shattered is the body that clings to a body, and shattered is the soul that is attached to these two. This is the case of one who is se'ef, or divided. He's disconnected from his higher realities. One who has cut himself off and ignored his own higher principles. Here's somebody who did that. His name is Charles Manson. I'll use him as an example. The nephesh will try to avoid the second death after the body dies by draining vital force from living beings through obsession or possession. This accumulates a great burden of hub, spiritual debt or sin. So, after death, the nephesh of a person who's totally materialistic and totally selfish will try to keep itself alive. It'll think, this is me, this is all I have. I cannot just die. I cannot just give it up and die. And will do anything it has to do to keep vital. There's some wonderful stories that are written by Jewish writers and Yiddish writers and even some non-Jewish writers about the ghosts that drain vital energy from even by eating rats and their blood and things like that, or by subtly removing the vitality from them. The stories of vampires that take the vitality away from people after their bodies are dead in the grave and so on. Nevertheless, in spite of that, the nephesh will, in spite of all of its efforts, eventually dissolve. But any continuity of consciousness will be lost. The soul, or neshama, will suffer many weeks or months of purifying fire in the Gehenna of the third heaven. Then it will fall asleep in paradise. It cannot awaken in the Chema, and it will then be reincarnated. No continuity of consciousness. This is the case of a lost soul. The immortal Yehida will emanate another physical incarnation through the neshama, but this new incarnation will be burdened with hub, or the consequences of sin, and face a difficult path in life, something like the Hindu concept of karma. So now the discarnate personality, the nephesh, or so-called astral or sidereal body, dissolves back into its etheric elements about 40 days after death to release its higher spiritual principles. We call this the second death. Now, this Devar of Yeshua says that just as the flesh dissolves after death, the nephesh that clings to flesh will also dissolve regardless of how much it tries to avoid it. The soul, or neshama, of a spiritually dead person will be left desolate without conscious connection. That's loss of soul. Yeshua said, "What profit if a man gain the whole world and lose his own neshama?" In the case of a true disciple, however, his consciousness will withdraw into the neshama through the sulam, or heavenly staircase of ruach, or spirit, because spiritual integration has been accomplished in the works of incarnate life, and he can avoid any need for purification of the soul that has been defiled. Yeshua gives us a wonderful saying or teaching about the reception of his Yeladim, of his initiates, into the heavens after their death. This is Gospel of Thomas, Logion 88. He says, "The angels and the prophets will come to you and give you those things you already have." Now, you have to understand that the convention of gift-giving and receiving in the Near East was that when one entered into another's home, he was given gifts, food, drink, hospitality, and perhaps other gifts. Then he must reciprocate by offering gifts to the host. So in death, when he enters into the heavenly places, the angels and the prophets will come to you and give you those things you already have. What are those things you already have? Well, they're those things that you have created with your works in life. The rights to certain sovereignties and powers that you have earned. When a disciple is welcomed into the body of BAR-ENASH after death, he will be given gifts, just as Adam Kadmon was given marvelous endowments from a great heavenly host, as Yeshua said. These gifts, which are rulerships and sovereignties, are based on what they already have or possess. They were earned by works of spiritual merit. That's give you those things you already have. To continue, and you will reciprocate by offering them those things which you have. What can the disciples offer in return? They're a guest in a home. They have to reciprocate. They've been given gifts. They have to give another gift back. They can reciprocate only by offering the treasure they have accumulated in their hearts. But then you will ask yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs? Nobody is taking what they themselves have to offer and to give. The angels and the prophets of heaven do not come to accept the treasures. Why not? Because the Abba and those dwelling in the eternal Olam do not, quote, lack. They have no need. There's no necessity for them to have anything. There's nothing you can give them. They are the givers. We are the takers. And you cannot give them anything because they have no need. So, even though the convention in the Near East was when you are given hospitality, you are offered gifts, and then you reciprocate by offering gifts back again, and so you will reciprocate by offering them those things which you have. But then you will ask yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs? They don't take your gifts. All beings of the eternal Olam Ha'aba are givers only. God and all heavenly beings have no need or lack, so they do not, quote, come and take what is theirs. We're going to end this presentation by looking at the Kabbalistic and the Gnostic forms of the robe of glory. Yeshua said, "Who would add to your stature? It is he who will give you your clothing." Well, when Yeshua said, "If God so clothe the grass or the lilies of the valley, how much more will he clothe you?" He's referring to the Kabbalistic concept of the robe of glory or righteousness that the righteous receive after death. Joseph's coat of many colors was what provided the basis for the Kabbalistic allegory of the robe of glory that the saints would receive after death. The concept first appeared in the Babylonian Trito-Isaiah about the 5th century BCE. In Messianic interpretation, this would become the raiment worn by the Zaddikim of the Kemah. This would become the special robe that would be worn by the saints who were worthy of the Kemah, or of what later the Christians would call resurrection. In Trito-Isaiah 61:10, he says, "I will greatly rejoice in Yahweh. My soul shall be joyful in my God, for he hath clothed me with the garments of liberation. He hath covered me with the robe of righteousness, as a bridegroom decketh himself with a garland, and as a bride adorneth herself with her jewels." This became Kabbalistic Midrash about, and Haggadah about the robe of glory that would be received by the saints after death. In the centuries of Midrashic interpretation from 4th to 1st centuries BCE, the robe of glory after death was developed into the Pharisaic concept of Kemah, or resurrection after death. It was part of Yeshua's Midrashic teaching that later served as a basis for Jewish Christian and Christian Gnostic teachings about the saved in Christ. Now, the Kabbalistic and Gnostic robe of glory was represented in the hymn of the pearl that we find among the Thomasians. It's in the Acts of Thomas. And it's a very, very beautiful story. It's a very beautiful hymn. Yeshua says, "I tell you that not even Solomon in all his glory was adorned like one of these lilies. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much better will he clothe you?" So this is part of the vision that Yeshua had for his Yeladim, his initiates, his disciples, after death, if they followed his halakha and became pure. Paul's spiritual body, the Soma Pneumaticon, probably represents one early Hellenistic Christian adaptation of the glorious afterlife raiment of the saints. Others are found in the late 1st century Christian era Baruch and other sources. Quote, "And they shall be transformed into every form they desire, from beauty into loveliness, and from light into the splendor of glory." This is late 1st century, but representing the robe of glory, robe of righteousness, Midrashic interpretation. All these were Kabbalistic antecedents to the Gnostic, multifaceted royal robe of glory, which we're going to look at because it's a development of Yeshua's teaching and of Jewish Kabbalistic teaching. Very beautifully done. It's probably written early in the 1st century, might have been even earlier than that. It's called the Hymn of the Pearl. It's found in the Acts of Thomas. It describes the perfected soul's return to heaven after successfully completing its mission to recover the pearl, or the original divine unity that has been lost in the bondage of fleshly incarnation. As the initiate ascends after death, his robe of glory rushes to him and envelops his soul. We're going to use a translation by Mead from the old Syriac text in his book the hymn of the Robe of Glory, which is available online. I give you a link here. This will give you some idea of the Kabbalistic ideas that Yeshua was steeped in. The glorious robe all bespangled with sparkling splendor of colors, with gold and also with beryls, chalcedonies, iris-hued opals, with sards of varying colors to match its grandeur. Moreover, it had been completed. With adamantine jewels, all of its seams were oft fastened. Moreover, the King of Kings' image was depicted entirely all over it. As with sapphires above, it was wrought in a motley of color. I saw that, moreover, all o'er it, the motions of gnosis abounding. I saw it further was making ready as though for to speak. Wow, this is a very special robe. It talks. I heard the sound of its music. It plays music too, which it whispered as it descended. Behold him, the active in deeds, for whom I was reared with my father. In other words, the robe was grown in heaven along with and in parallel to the deeds of righteousness and compassion that the initiate had done in life physically. Parallel to that in the heavens, this robe was being fashioned and grown in the abode of the Abba. It may be confused in the Gnostic idea with the idea of Yahid, which will unite with the feminine Yahida. I too have felt in myself how that with his works waxed my stature. The robe is saying, I felt in myself that with his works, the personality on earth, the kind of works he did, my stature waxed and increased. And so it was being created by means of the works that were done on earth. Now you might remember in the Acts of Thomas that when Thomas is given a great deal of money by the king to build him a great palace, that Thomas keeps getting more, and the king wants to know the progress. He finally wants to see the palace that he's built for him. But Thomas has spent all of this money giving it to the poor. And when the king finds out, he wants to kill Thomas, and then Thomas says, what I've been building is a palace for you in the heavens, and it is glorious. So the idea of the parallel work between the glory, between the acts of the righteous on earth, creating and growing a glorious something or other in the heavens, is part of this concept. And now, with its kingly motions, was it pouring itself out towards me, and made haste in the hands of its givers that I might take and receive it. Givers. And me, too, my love urged forward to run for to meet it, to take it, and I stretched myself forth to receive it. With its beauty of color I decked me, and my mantle of sparkling colors I wrapped entirely o'er all of me. I clothed me therewith, and ascended to the gate of greeting and homage. I bowed my head and did homage to the glory of him who had sent it, whose commands I now had accomplished, and who had, too, done what he'd promised. And there at the gate of his house sons I mingled myself with his princes, archangelic beings. For he had received me with gladness, and I was with him in his sovereignty. Well, for a $3 video pledge on Patreon, you'll receive a PDF file of my full translation and analysis of all the Logia attributed to Yeshua, as well as all the Gnostic Logia in the Gospel of Thomas, with detailed explanations of the authentic sayings transmitted through the Aramaic core embedded in the text. In addition, you will get PDF files of my books shown below. A $3 pledge comes to $6 a month. You'll also get a PDF file of Abba-Un, incarnating the new humanity, and of course the Kabbalistic words of Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas. For a $5 pledge, you'll get a lot more stuff. So please click on the Patreon link in my description just below the YouTube video to become a patron helping to sponsor my work. And thank you very much.